They say, oh, the most horrible person ever. And that's because, when he was an old man, he was suffering from dementia and from elder abuse. He was not a happy person as an old person. He was deaf. He was geriatric. He didn't know what was going on. He was being exploited by his manager, by people who were trying to make money out of him. Often he couldn't even understand what people were saying to him. I think if you read this book, you understand him as a young man and as a completely different person.
We're totally booked.
Rock and roll!
Well, I think I'll leave you to your reading.
Little Hand says it's time to rock and roll.
Rock and roller!
We are totally booked.
Welcome back to Booked on Rock, the podcast for those about to read and rock. I'm Eric Senich. Before we get started, if you want to support the podcast and get episodes commercial free, sign up for the Backstage Pass from Patreon for just $5 a month. Link in the show notes, or go to bookedonrock.com. All right, now on to our guest, Nettie Baker. Nettie is the eldest daughter of legendary Cream drummer Ginger Baker and was there throughout every stage of his remarkable career. She collaborated with her father on his 2010 autobiography, Ginger Baker, Hellraiser, and has since written several books of her own, including Tales of a Rock Star's Daughter, More Tales of a Rock Star's Daughter, and Full Cream. Her latest book, Cream Chronicled, documents every live performance by the iconic band Cream, featuring her father alongside Jack Bruce and Eric Clapton. Welcome to the podcast, Nettie.
Hi. Hello, everyone.
You had a front row seat to your father's life and career. How old were you when you first went on the road or saw your dad perform in concert?
Well, I think it was before Cream because he was in the Graham Bond organisation. And that's when I first met Jack Bruce, and obviously they were in that band together, and so I've seen those sort of shows. That's when I met the Moody Blues and things like that. So yeah, I was out and about before Cream, and so Cream formed when I was 5.5. So.
And how often were you on the road with your dad? Was it a consistent?
Well, we went on the road. Yeah, we went on the road for the first Cream tour in Boston. So that was October '67. And then we were for the sort of penultimate tour in '68. And then we were on the Goodbye tour. And then obviously I went on the Blind Faith tour as well.
When did you start thinking, you know what, I should really write books about Cream and about my dad? And
Not really ever. I mean, I'd written my 2 books, and then my dad contacted me and asked me if I'd do the autobiography with him, but my 2 books hadn't come out yet. So I thought, I mean, I'd already done an English degree. I've got a BA first and a master's. So and then I was interested in doing something, and then he said, can you do mine with me? So I did that, and I thought, oh, that'd be good, that'll help me get my own stuff. But I waited another 10 years till I found my publisher who could get mine out, because people said, oh, no one's ever heard of you, so who cares? Obviously they've done really well. And then my publishers asked me to do Full Cream because they thought that would be nice to do a copy table, very limited. I think there were 3 copies left yesterday of the 1,000 print we did. So that was always going to be a limited book. And then they suddenly said to me, would you like to do a book on every show Cream ever did? And so I thought, oh, okay. And, I'm trained to research. So it was actually bringing in the stuff that I've been trained to do academically onto that. So I thought, yeah, okay, I'll give it a go. And there we are. That's what happened.
I wish I had a chance. My dad was a longtime broadcaster and writer, and I always wanted to document his life and do something for him, but we never had the chance to do that. I wonder how special that was for you to be able to collaborate with him for his book.
Well, I mean, most of it I knew already, and there wasn't much that I didn't already know. So yeah, it was interesting. Said it was great fun, but it certainly was interesting. Yeah, because I've been around him when I was a teenager. I spent a lot of time with him, as my books document. So I knew a lot of what had happened already. So I had the bit of the heads up there.
In the introduction, you say the idea for the book actually came from your publisher asking if you could document Cream's gigs. And at first glance, documenting the shows of a band that existed for only a couple of years. Yeah, that's simple, right? But you describe it as a morass of confusion. What made it so complicated?
because it's never really Cream just had built a myth around it, and I think it happened on the Goodbye tour. The journalists, particularly in the United States, because they'd left England behind, they left their UK fans, and things just became so massively famous that people were saying, "Oh, you have to be cool. You have to say you'd seen Cream." And so quickly, and then they were just gone. And I think people just thought, well, how can that happen? And they made up stuff. And so the myth became stories about Cream, but never actually I mean, people have said they've done it, written a book about Cream. They're incomprehensible. I couldn't even understand what was going on in half of the books written about them, because they followed no chronological order. Things were missing. They hadn't researched. They'd just done things that they'd heard from people. So that's what made it complicated. And then finding things that happened over 60 years ago, or 60 years ago, finding where the concerts were, you'd have to try and find newspaper reviews and things like that. Because often you'll get a gig will be advertised, there'll be a poster for it, but they didn't go. It was cancelled or things like that. And it was finding out. And sometimes they were like 3 on one day, and they were playing all-nighters, so the amount of work they did was phenomenal. 2-3 shows a day, going somewhere, then playing another club at 2 o'clock in the morning. So was it that day or the next day or the day before? How long did it take them to drive there? Could they have done this? And it's all very well. Loads of people said, well, I was there, I saw it, and they weren't there, because they definitely 100% have proven they weren't there. They go nuts. So the whole thing was quite an experience.
Yeah, I can imagine. One of the most vivid moments you write about in that opening chapter is your memory of coming home and seeing Ginger, Jack, and Eric playing together in your living room. What do you remember about that day?
Well, that was the first time, that they ever played together in our living room in Neasden, which they all have talked about separately. Well, I mean, I was just a child coming home from school, so I mean, I was used to music being in my life, so just like amps, and they were really fired up. That was the thing, that the kids outside, there were fields outside, and they'd seen kids outside dancing to the music, and they thought, wow, this must be good. So they were just very, very enthusiastic about what they've formed.
Before the official debut of Cream at the Windsor Jazz and Blues Festival, they play what you call a sort of secret debut at the Twisted Wheel in Manchester. Why did the band want to test themselves in front of an audience first before making it official?
Not sure whether they definitely did or not. I think the spot came up because Discotex, or whatever his name was, cancelled. So there was an opening there, and they'd all played at that club separately several times. So they knew the club. And I think, I don't know whether it was the manager or whether it was them or whatever, but they just thought, yeah, let's go and do this gig. But it was advertised, and they already had their name. So a lot of people say, oh, it wasn't advertised, which it was. A lot of people say, no, they never even had a name until months later they did, because Eric named them that first day and said, hey, man, we're the cream. Means we're the cream of music. He didn't mean we're the cream of the crop. He didn't mean we're the best. He just meant, wow, we're the cream of music. So they were already called the Cream, but you could also call them Cream, and they were called both for the whole time as well. People go nutty about that one, but I can assure you it's true.
July 31st, 1966, at the Windsor Jazz and Blues Festival, considered the official debut. You described the balloon meadow turning into a muddy field that looked like something out of World War I, and Ginger slipped in the mud just before going on stage, ruined his pristine white trousers. Just how rough were the conditions that day?
Well, I think there's a lot. I found a lot, and you can see in the book, I found a lot of reports about how wet it was, and the bandwagons were skidding and people were falling over. So yeah, it was a very wet day, but I don't think the crowd cared. They had their Macs and umbrellas, and they had a fantastic time seeing the new band.
And one of the myths is how many songs they actually played. Some later recollections say it was just 3 numbers, but contemporary reports suggest a much longer set. What did your research reveal about that?
Well, it can't have been just 3, but certainly they said at a lot of the early gigs, they did say, sorry, we haven't got any more numbers, so we're just going to jam. So they didn't have a huge amount, but if they did a 40-minute set, they certainly had more than 3 songs. So I'm thinking there were definitely more than 3. 4, 5, 6, but not a huge amount. And so they sort of played around with different blues they knew and jammed and things like that. So yeah.
Early 67, Cream played Brian Epstein's Sundays at the Seville series. And one of the fascinating details is who was in the audience. Keith Moon was there. Jimi Hendrix was there. John Mayall was there. And there's a great story about Keith Moon. He's leaning out so far out of his box, applauding Ginger's solo that someone had to hold on to his ankles. Quite a lineup of rock royalty just watching the band. What does that say about the band's reputation by that point?
I think Rick Gunnell were the brothers that owned the Flamingo Club. He said, in 66, 67, Cream were the top band to book in the clubs to get people in. So that they really were the thing, the new thing then that everybody knew, and everybody wanted to go there. They were the sort of the musicians band. All these people were also their friends. So yeah, it says a lot about the way other musicians were viewing them at the time, as well as the audience who also noted that.
By late 67, they were becoming a massive live act, an exhausting touring schedule. The press reported that your dad collapsed and doctors suspected an ulcer, but the reality was far more complicated. How serious was the situation when Jack Bruce and his wife found Ginger and rushed him to the hospital?
There was a lot of pressure going on, and there had been a bad review in the Melody Maker that day. I don't know whether he saw it or not. I just sort of speculated a bit there, but he found that he had problems at home. My mum was newly pregnant. She wanted to move. We were still in the tiny house where, the band had formed, which was a 1-bedroom apartment. It was tiny and rented, so we hadn't even bought it. So there was a lot of pressure at home. He was having pressure with, it was his band, but then things became more pressured when they made the albums and things like that, other people getting involved. So, he had been a heroin addict, but he was clean through the beginning of Cream. And then he unfortunately met a heroin addict that he knew at the BBC, who was part of one of the BBC bands. And he gave him a turn on, and he overdosed because he obviously wasn't used to it. And so then he got rushed to hospital, and it was a right drama. Jack puts it in the wrong place, but I've got it in the right place.
The Winterland Ballroom and the Fillmore West shows in San Francisco, late February into March of 68. Those are considered the pinnacle of Cream's live powers, capturing them at the height of their skills, their improvisational skills. What do you think was about that city and its audiences that connected so strongly with Cream?
I think they just were in the right place at the right time, and they said they had a fantastic time. Most of the audiences in America said they couldn't believe that the bands they were used to listening to just didn't have that standard of musicianship, and they were quite, blown away by it, which is what, my dad said. We went there to teach the Yanks how to play. And I think that did happen. But I think the audience were also, Summer of Love, everyone was tuning in, turning on, and all of that malarkey. So I think that it was just caught the zeitgeist at the right time. And that's how it really took off.
Tom Dowd produced those live albums. He just seemed to have some certain magic there with capturing the live essence of bands.
Oh, yeah, my dad rated Tom Dowd. He thought that the way he put everything together was, really amazing. And, contemporary, he really rated him. And he talked well of him also much later. So I think he did rate what Tom did. Yes, very much so.
There was some kind of altercation between Cream's camp and promoter Bill Graham, which resulted in the band never playing those venues again. What do we actually know about what happened?
There are so many different stories, and they're absolutely hilarious. But I mean, I do remember being somewhere where but I can't place exactly where it was. But I remember a big argument that he did have with Bill. I don't know whether it was to do with, and it could have been that Bill wasn't going to pay the amount Stigwood wanted. But there seems to be also Ben Palmer mentioned something about, there was a problem with a running order. I just don't feel, I think they just didn't feel they were getting the right sort of respect for the amount of punters they were pulling in. And therefore, he was quite an abrasive character. So if you put him up against my dad, that's not probably going to go very well. So, yeah, it's a mystery, but I think it was probably a few different things that all contributed to one argument, and that was it.
Going back to the fan responses, one fan recalled that after one performance, the crowd was just staring at each other in stunned silence because the band was so good. Did you find many accounts like that from those in attendance at those shows? And how did you go about getting those? Did people just reach out to you? Did you go on social media saying, hey, I'm looking for people who are there. Let me know what you remember?
Yes, I went on social media and asked everyone. But the thing you have to be wary of is after a long time, memories aren't always right. But so what you have to do is you have to find out as many accounts agree with each other, then you're getting somewhere near the truth. And there were a lot of accounts of that sort of stunned silence, sort of as though it was a religious experience. That had come, I remember hearing that, decades ago. So I think, it can be said. And I think people have forgotten that. So I think the book brings it back to what it was like at the time. People don't think, oh, it's overrated, it's this, it's that, oh, it's boring. But that at the time, that's what people wanted, what was selling, what was, into the stratosphere. And that's, I think, what the book really brings people back into 66, 67, 68, so they can be there.
The book is titled Cream Chronicled. It came out March 20th, so you can find it wherever books are sold. Our guest is Nettie Baker. Documents every live performance by Cream. And by the summer of 68, Cream announced that they would be splitting up, which shocked a lot of fans. And many people assumed that the breakup was mainly about personality clashes between the band members. But Eric Clapton later said that was only a small part of the story. What else was going on?
I think the clashes weren't anything like, and many times in the book, Eric says, oh, we have a round and we all make up. We love each other. So it was definitely the amount of work that they had to do. They just overworked. They never got breaks. They never got a chance to write any other new music, which Eric also said was upsetting. So that they never got a chance to do anything that normal bands did because they were just being pushed and pushed and pushed. And in fact, when they went AWOL is when they said they were going to extend the tour. My dad said he felt he'd been on tour for a year. It's just like, it was just far too much because no one was expecting it to be that big. So when it was that big, everyone thought, oh, let's make as much money as we can out of it. And of course, Eric was quite young then. And well, they were all three very young, but they got stressed by it. I think just like nowadays, people don't do that sort of thing.
It's interesting. Ginger seemed surprised the decision to split came so early, and he thought the band still had a lot of life left in it. Jack Bruce suggested the band might have survived if each member maybe pursued outside projects while still keeping Cream together. Do you think that could have worked?
I do think it could have worked because it did with a lot of other bands. And I think if it had been properly approached, it could have worked. And I think that's what they were trying to do. And my dad and Stigwood, for certain, wanted it to continue. And I think all three of them were very sad when it ended. I don't think that's really what they wanted. But then it was sort of like, oh, well, I think I'm going to leave. Okay, yes, so am I. And then, oh, dear, you've said it. Young people, they weren't even 30. So, everyone knows what young, especially when everyone's drinking and smoking loads of pot and stuff, you're not really that rational. And then the management didn't seem to be able to hold it together, which is quite extraordinary, but that's what happened.
The Royal Albert Hall farewell concert ended up becoming two shows because the first sold out so quickly. In the book, you made clear that there had been real efforts behind the scenes to keep the band together. How close did Cream actually come to surviving past 1968?
I don't know. It's difficult to say from what I could find out. But I do think, Eric seemed, no one had enough information. And I suppose pre-internet and, that people didn't really know what was going on when they were somewhere else, that clearly. You could talk on the phone, but so I think Eric seemed surprised that the fans in England still remembered. He was always very keen on what the public thought. And the others, they obviously didn't want the band to end. So I just think, I don't know how close it came. They did try. And I just think they probably didn't have enough discussion about it.
You push back against that old idea that Cream ended simply because the members couldn't get along. After studying that final period so closely, what do you think people still misunderstand about the breakup?
They misunderstand the dynamic, and they've done is heard elephant whispers. They've heard things, and I've heard where from. I mean, I went to the sources, and I couldn't find any contemporary reports of fighting on stage at all. I mean, I was there when he kicked the door of the Gorham Hotel. I'm not then they never said that they didn't have an argument now and again, but what bands don't have arguments and didn't have arguments in the 60s? Lots of them.
Sure.
And so, yeah, it's just a thing that people, and of course, my dad and Jack worked together from 1962 to 2008 consistently. So, I mean, if they hate it, I mean, they were on tour together. Jack, we socialized, we knew them. It to say that they were a complete, and they couldn't even be in the same room was just absolutely. It's been made up, but people want that. I don't know why people want that. They want to believe that, but it is not true.
Today they call it clickbait on videos and on the internet, but that back then it's the same thing. I mean, the media is looking for something that's sensational because
Yes.
that's what people want. Cream walked back onto the Royal Albert Hall stage in May 2005, 37 years after that farewell concert. How electric was the atmosphere in the hall that night?
Yeah, it was amazing. It really was. Once in a lifetime experience. It was great. People cried. They were just so happy. It was great.
Some reviewers even suggested the band seemed to enjoy themselves more than they had in the 60s. Did you notice a different energy between the three musicians?
Yes, I think that they did because they knew what they'd had. And I think those first shows at the Royal Albert Hall in 2005, they were just really over the moon and realised how great it had been, and what they'd made, really, what they'd created, and how much people still loved it. So yeah, I think it was pretty special, that reunion.
For you, any shows personally that stand out for you, that are favorite shows, favorite gigs?
Definitely the reunion in 2005 was, because it was like being transported back to childhood. But I remember being in Cafe Go Go or wherever it was, seeing, dancing to Cream in one of those New York clubs, whatever. I can remember that. And so to have actually been there, that's pretty cool, I reckon. So yeah, I think that one will do for me.
Yeah. Well, last question. You witnessed the band's story from the inside, from those early days to the reunion decades later. When you think about Cream now, what will you remember most?
I feel sad, actually, because it's, things went badly wrong for my dad. He didn't really pick up on that. I mean, it went wrong for all three of them, but they recovered in different ways. Obviously, Eric picked up quite quick, but and became an icon. But for my dad, it didn't really. He lost his way, and then he went to Africa, which was probably a terrible mistake. And he's not really credited for bringing that sort of African music into the mainstream either. They've forgotten. They just say, "Oh, Fela Kuti, Tony Allen." They don't even mention that it was my dad that brought it there. I mean, so it was obviously a mistake for him to get involved in that. He never got the right management. He never got the right people, and then it's resulted in us having to spend a year researching a book for no money because we haven't done very well at all. So it hasn't, it makes me feel sad that it's that mega and I'm not living in a mansion. No, it does make me cross.
Yeah. Well, your dad is so respected, though, among musicians and the fans. Is there anything misunderstood about him? I mean, there's been a lot, documentaries and written about him.
Well, yes. I mean, the main thing is, they say, "Oh, the most horrible person ever." And that's because, when he was an old man, he was suffering from dementia and from elder abuse. He was under social services safeguarding several times. He was not a happy person as an old person. He was deaf. He was geriatric. He didn't know what was going on. He was being exploited by his manager, by people who were trying to make money out of him. And so that's why he came across, because often he couldn't even understand what people were saying to him. The Chad Smith thing, he didn't know who Chad Smith was. He had no idea what was going on. He had no guidance. So I think, yeah, if you read this book, you understand him as a young man and as a completely different person and a lot of people have good stories. But again, it's, clickbait on the internet. And, you know, the terrible photographs for his jazz album, Why, that they let out. He didn't like them. We didn't like them. We said to them, no, no, no. He did great art. He could have done art for the album. He did the Sound of 65, Graham Bond album, that he did that cover, painted that cover. So, yeah, it's just a disaster, really. And, you know, people have got the complete wrong end of the stick about him, really. I mean, it wasn't easy, but he was a fully rounded human being, not the story. Oh, he was arrogant. He was this, he was that. You know, he was good friends with John Bonham. John Bonham worshipped him. You know, that film was cut and edited very, very cleverly. And you know, Jay made a good film. It was Jay's film. My dad was paid for it. And the person he was with they were asking for more money because they didn't have any. So the film was Jay's film. So Jay did the film how he wanted, and it did well, but it's not accurate.
Well, that's why you're doing a great thing by chronicling your dad's life, career. Cream, are there more in store? Do you want to write more about Cream?
Well, I don't know. I mean, there's someone else doing a blind faith book at the moment, and I have been in touch with him, but I'm quite worried about how that might turn out. Never mind.
Yeah,
that might be quite good, but I mean, there's plenty of other projects I'd like to do. I think, you know, I feel quite proud of this, that I have. I'd like someone to. I've got all the Super 8 still, you know, and I want someone to buy that. I mean, no one's seen it. It's Cream on tour. And I'd like Netflix maybe to do that and have a narration over it with music or whatever. You could use that. I'd like somebody maybe could do a proper Cream documentary, like an accurate one, be a consultant on that. Hey, you know, that would be great, but whether it'll happen or not, I don't know.
Fingers crossed right there. I'm putting fingers crossed right in front of the camera. Cream Chronicled, out now. You can find it wherever books are sold. Look for it at your nearest bookstore.
The best thing they can do, go to their bookstore and get them to order it in.
Yeah. Okay.
Because it won't be on the shelves.
Gotcha.
They have to order it in. So get it on Amazon online. You've got it on Kindle now as well. If you want to get it from your bookstore, go to the bookstore and they can order it in for you.
Okay, great. And yeah, if people want to find their local independent bookstore, they can always go to the website book.rock.com. Can people find you online, Nettie, if they want to reach out to you?
Yeah, so it's Ginger Baker with the blue check mark verified page on Facebook.
Okay, great.
And there's also a website, gingerbaker.com. That's our website. That's got all the links.
Nettie Baker, thank you so much for doing this. Again, thank you so much for all the work that you've done for Cream fans and for fans of your dad.
Thank you.
That's it. It's in the books.